Edward Sterling had constructed his existence around the principle of control. Each choice, each investment, each meticulously planned step had brought him to an unimaginable level of success. He was a master of the game, fully aware of the dynamics of influence and wielding them with unmatched skill. Yet, everything fell apart in a heartbeat when he laid eyes on her. In the lobby of a luxurious resort, he found himself gripping the hand of a little girl with striking blue eyes. Standing before him was the last person he anticipated encountering once more. His ex-wife, Clara. The child she cradled was of the perfect age, the likeness undeniable. A chilling awareness took root in his heart. Had Clara been concealing a secret from him all these years? Had he inadvertently strolled by his own daughter, completely unaware of her existence? Edward was not the type to dwell on the past. His whole existence revolved around progress, making choices without a second thought, and always having a clear vision of what lay ahead. Years were devoted to mastering the intricacies of control, forging an empire through unwavering determination and meticulous discipline. To those looking in, he seemed to possess it all. A thriving business worth millions, authority, sway, and the knack for entering any space with an air of commanding respect. As he settled into the opulent lobby of the seaside resort, cradling a glass of whiskey and allowing the gentle murmur of conversation to envelop him, an unexpected sensation began to surface, the strange burden of fatigue. He arrived with the facade of seeking respite, yet deep down, he was aware that his mind was already occupied with the upcoming meetings, the deals poised for completion, and the calls that awaited his attention. He was not particularly skilled at the art of relaxation. He savored another sip, releasing a slow breath as his eyes drifted toward the entrance. It was at that moment he caught sight of her. Initially, he believed his imagination was deceiving him. The figure that emerged from the revolving door bore an uncanny resemblance to a specter from his history, a person he had assured himself would remain a distant memory. She glided with a serene elegance, her dark brown hair flowing over her shoulders as she cradled the small child in her arms. The vision stirred a profound tension within him. Clara. For a brief instant, he simply gazed, struggling to comprehend the scene before him. She appeared nearly unchanged from 3 years prior, striking and graceful. Yet now there was an added hint of weariness etched into her expression. Nothing could have prepared me for the surprise of finding her here, in this unexpected setting, especially with the child she held in her arms. A tiny girl, perhaps just 3 years old, clings to Clara's neck, her face nestled into her mother's shoulder. Edward's fingers clenched around the glass, his heartbeat once steady and measured, now a silent storm brewing beneath the surface. Now overwhelmed by a sense of urgency, he found himself at a loss for words. He had not laid eyes on Clara since their union came to a close. Their divorce unfolded with a serene grace, devoid of any theatrical courtroom confrontations or protracted disputes. She departed, and he allowed her to leave, convincing himself it was the right choice. He immersed himself in his tasks, believing that what they had once experienced was merely a diversion. He had progressed, or so he repeatedly convinced himself. But observing her now, with a child who appeared to be just a heartbeat away from the instant she had exited his life, a chill lodged itself deep within his gut. Could this be her daughter? And if that were the case, why did he feel a nauseating certainty that he already possessed the answer? Clara approached the reception desk, adjusting the child in her arms as she engaged with the hotel staff. Edward's attention drifted away from everything else in the room. The voices surrounding him blurred into a distant murmur, and the soft music emanating from the speakers faded into mere background noise. His attention was completely drawn to the striking resemblance in the little girl's features. A palpable urgency enveloped him from afar, an instinct unlike any he had experienced previously. He had to have a conversation with her. He sought clarity. Yet, just as he contemplated his next move, just as he struggled to find the strength to rise, Clara was already making her way to the elevator, cradling the child tightly as she vanished behind the sliding doors. Edward stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the void left behind in her absence. The meticulously crafted existence he had established for himself had never seemed more precarious. Edward hardly found rest that night. No matter how hard he attempted to banish the vision of Clara and the little girl from his thoughts, it relentlessly re-emerged, insisting on his focus. He dedicated years to mastering the skill of compartmentalization, carefully safeguarding his emotions in pursuit of logic and control. Yet this evening, his thoughts are a tumultuous arena of inquiries, each devoid of resolution. Did the child belong to her? It was clear as day. The girl's grip on her was unwavering, and Clara's embrace was undeniably protective, leaving no room for uncertainty. Yet the true inquiry, the one that lingered in his mind, was the one he doubted he was prepared to confront. Did she belong to him? A peculiar wave of panic washed over him, an unfamiliar sensation that he had never experienced before. Why had Clara never mentioned that she had a child, his child? Did she genuinely think he was unworthy of knowing? Or perhaps, had she believed he wouldn't mind? As the initial rays of sunlight began to seep through the expansive windows of his suite, Edward had come to a conclusion. He refused to waste another moment caught up in uncertainty. He sought the truth, and he was determined to uncover it. Following a brisk shower and a switch into one of his finely crafted suits, as he believed that maintaining control was essential in any circumstance, he made his way downstairs. He was uncertain whether Clara remained at the hotel, yet an instinct deep within him suggested she was still there. She would never have ventured to a place like this for merely one night. He entered the restaurant, his eyes sweeping across the room as he moved forward. The resort was designed for the affluent, those individuals who effortlessly indulged in midweek getaways without a hint of hesitation. However, Edward had no interest in seeking them out. His gaze fell upon a quaint table by the terrace, where Clara was seated alongside a young girl. His heart raced at the sight of them together in the daylight. Clara appeared as breathtaking as ever, her dark brown hair swept back into a relaxed ponytail, exuding a casual grace in her demeanor. The child, Lily, if memory served from the name the receptionist had mentioned the previous night, sat quietly, swinging her small legs beneath the table as she nibbled on a piece of toast. It was the first moment Edward had genuinely observed her, and what he beheld caused a knot to form in his stomach. Her eyes were a striking shade of blue, those cerulean orbs. It's undeniable at this point. Drawing in a calming breath, he advanced, approaching their table with determination. Clara observed him prior to his utterance. Her body stiffened at once, her fingers gripping her coffee cup tightly. She cast a fleeting look at Lily before turning her gaze back to him, her face a mask of ambiguity. "We must have a conversation," Edward remarked, his tone measured and calm. Clara paused, casting another look at Lily before giving a slight nod. "Not here," she whispered. "Let's rendezvous outside in 15 minutes. Edward gave a slight nod before turning on his heel and walking away, keen to avoid any unnecessary drama. His pulse throbbed in his ears, emotions wound tightly just below the surface. 15 minutes later, he found himself by the serene garden terrace at the resort's edge, hands tucked into his pockets, gazing out at the vast ocean. The tumultuous waves offered no solace to the tempest brewing within him. Suddenly, he became aware of footsteps trailing behind him. He glanced over to see Clara positioned there, arms folded, her demeanor cautious. Edward inhaled deeply, seeking to regain his composure. "Does she belong to me?" Edward inquired. Clara recoiled ever so slightly, her gaze igniting with an enigmatic spark. She let out a breath, her eyes drifting down briefly before locking onto his gaze. "Indeed," she replied in a gentle tone. "She belongs to you." The ground appeared to shift beneath his feet. 3 years have passed. 3 years, and he had never realized. From this moment on, everything in his life would change forever. Edward remained motionless, grappling with the profound impact of Clara's words. Her words came out with such simplicity, such quietness. Yet the impact struck him like a colossal tidal wave. Lily was his beloved daughter. His hands clenched in his pockets while he struggled to maintain a steady breath. A myriad of feelings surged inside him. Stunned, furious, incredulous. Yet, Underneath it all lay a profound essence, something unrefined. He had a child, a fact he had never even been aware of. Clara shifted restlessly, clearly bracing herself for his response. Her arms remained crossed, a posture that suggested she was readying herself for whatever might unfold next. "Why didn't you share this with me?" His voice was soft, yet the sharpness in it was unmistakable. Clara let out a sharp breath, her fingers pressing against her forehead as she finally locked eyes with him. "Things were not meant to unfold this way, Edward. I never intended to prevent you from having her. However, by the time I discovered I was expecting, we were already unraveling. You seemed entirely absorbed in your tasks, creating a sense of separation. I was unsure of the best way to get in touch with you." His jaw clenched, indicating that you made the decision for me. You assumed I wouldn't be affected. Her eyes sparkled with a hint of exasperation. "I assumed you might feel a sense of duty, that you would avoid responsibility not out of desire. I wanted to ensure that Lily never felt like she was a burden as she grew up." Edward released a sardonic chuckle, shaking his head in disbelief. "You believed that hiding her away was the wisest choice." Clara stated with conviction. "I believed I was safeguarding her, safeguarding our interests. The difficulty of that choice was immense, yet in that moment, it seemed like the sole option available to me." Edward dragged his hand down his face, seeking to steady himself. He had constructed his whole existence on reason, on mastery, while crafting deliberate choices. Yet, this was an eventuality he had never anticipated. "She's 3, he finally murmured, his voice softer now. 3 years of her life vanished. Time lost forever." Clara's features relaxed, and for the first time, a hint of remorse flickered in her gaze. "I'm aware," she confessed, "and I won't attempt to defend it. However, Edward, I never intended to separate you from her indefinitely." He cast a keen glance in her direction. "So, what stopped you from getting in touch?" Clara paused, letting out a slow breath. "I feared that if I acted, you would claim her as your own." The words left him speechless. He gazed at her, attempting to grasp the meaning of her recent words. "I wouldn't have done that," he said, his voice strained. Clara locked eyes with him, her face a canvas of enigmatic emotions. "Would you not?" Edward took a deep breath. Truthfully, he found himself uncertain about what actions he might have taken in that moment. He had been unforgiving in his journey, unyielding in his quest for achievement. Would he have battled for custody? Would he have attempted to manage the situation as he managed every other aspect of his life? Perhaps Clara was onto something. Perhaps he wasn't the kind of person she could rely on for something as delicate as a child. Yet he had transformed into someone entirely different. "I want to see her," he said finally, his voice unwavering. "I wish to deepen my understanding of my daughter." Clara studied his expression intently, as if deliberating on the trustworthiness of his words. In that moment, she gradually inclined her head in agreement. "Very well," she replied gently. "However, we proceed according to Lily's preferences. She is unfamiliar with you, Edward. One cannot simply enter her world and anticipate that all will align perfectly in an instant." He nodded, comprehension dawning in his eyes. He expressed that he doesn't anticipate that. "However, I have no intention of leaving this time." Clara observed him intently, and for the first time, he noticed a change in her expression. The fortified barriers remained, yet a fissure had appeared, a tiny breach in their steadfastness. "Then we begin at a leisurely pace," she remarked. "Progress unfolds gradually." Edward nodded once more, his heart heavy with feelings he struggled to understand. For years, he had convinced himself that he was alone, that the only thing that mattered was the empire he had constructed. For the first time, he understood his mistakes, and he was determined to do everything necessary to reclaim the time he had squandered. Edward had always faced situations with confidence. He had orchestrated billion-dollar agreements, faced off in boardrooms with the most formidable executives, and maneuvered through crises that would have shattered those with less fortitude. As he lingered outside the hotel's garden terrace, anticipating Clara's arrival with Lily, an unfamiliar sensation began to twist within his chest. How did you go about introducing yourself to a daughter who was unaware of your existence? Clara had emphasized that this would unfold gradually, according to Lily's preferences. Edward grasped that concept. He hadn't anticipated her rushing into his embrace or addressing him as Dad right away, yet the significance of the moment still bore heavily upon him. He had already forfeited 3 years. He was determined not to squander another moment. The gentle patter of footsteps drew his attention. Clara approached him, her stance taut yet steady, her deep-set eyes a mystery. And next to her, gripping her hand firmly, was Lily. Edward felt a sudden tightness in his throat. She was diminutive, hardly coming up to Clara's waist. Her dark curls danced gently with each step, and those blue eyes, mirroring his own reflection each morning, sparkled with a serene curiosity. She grasped her mother's fingers tightly, a clear sign of her uncertainty in this unfamiliar situation she had just entered. Clara knelt beside her, her voice a gentle whisper. "Darling, it's Edward. He's someone I consider a friend." Edward experienced a sharp sensation at the mention of the word friend, yet he remained unresponsive. He grasped the reason behind Clara's words. Referring to him as her father directly could have felt a bit too intense. Lily gazed up at him, her head tilting ever so slightly, as if she were examining a riddle that eluded her understanding. She remained silent for a moment, simply gazing up at him with her remarkably large eyes. Edward lowered himself to her height, his movements deliberate and gentle. "Greetings, Lily," he spoke softly. "It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance." Lily moved a bit, glancing at Clara as if seeking comfort. At her mother's nod, she found her voice at last. "Hello." It was merely a single word, delicate and hesitant, yet it caused a stir deep within Edward. He offered a warm smile, aiming to soothe her nerves. "I understand you enjoy solving puzzles. Is that really the case?" Lily's eyes sparkled with a trace of curiosity. She gave a slow nod. "I'm not particularly skilled at them," Edward confessed, maintaining a cheerful tone. "Perhaps you could share your knowledge with me at some point." Lily stole another look at Clara, gauging whether this was acceptable. After a brief pause, she nodded again. Edward exhaled slowly. He was unaware that he was grasping it. It may have been small, yet it marked the beginning. Clara stood tall, her fingers gliding gently through Lily's curls. "How about we take a seat?" she proposed, guiding them to a shaded spot featuring a quaint table and chairs. Edward trailed behind, his thoughts still swirling in the wake of the overwhelming truth. Before him sat his daughter, her fingers idly toying with the hem of her dress as she cast furtive, inquisitive looks in his direction. Clara delved into her bag, retrieving a petite coloring book along with a vibrant set of crayons, and set them down before Lily. "Feel free to add some color while we chat, all right?" Lily nodded, opening the book and thoughtfully choosing a blue crayon. Edward observed her intently for a brief moment before he chose to speak once more. "What color do you like the most?" he inquired. Lily kept her gaze down, yet her response came softly. "Purple." He grinned. "That's an excellent selection. The hue is quite bold." Lily stole another glance at him, maintaining his gaze for a heartbeat longer before returning her attention to the page before her. Edward let out a breath, adjusting his position in the chair. He had anticipated discomfort, but now that he found himself here, truly seated with her, he understood the extent of the effort that lay before him. Clara seemed to have an intuition about his thoughts, as she gently broke the silence. She tends to be reserved in the presence of unfamiliar faces. Edward gave a slight nod. "That's perfectly fine. We'll proceed according to her rhythm." Lily immersed herself in her coloring, while Edward seized the opportunity to observe her closely. The delicate contours of her face, the way she nibbled her lip in focus, the gentle curl of her fingers around the crayon. It felt almost dreamlike to realize that the little girl belonged to him, that he had been absent for her first steps, her first words, and all those precious milestones that parents hold dear. However, he was determined not to overlook anything further. After some time, Lily paused her coloring and glanced up at him. "What's your favorite color?" Edward beamed at the modest yet meaningful instance. He stated that he believes he understands now. Purple seems quite appealing. Lily observed him for a moment, then nodded as if she found his response satisfactory. Clara observed the exchange, a gentle warmth beginning to touch her features. Edward understood that this was merely the start, yet for the first time in what felt like ages, he sensed he was precisely where he needed to be. Edward experienced a peculiar sensation, as if time was both dragging and racing simultaneously. The days after his initial encounter with Lily unfolded like a finely tuned performance, every exchange meticulously crafted, each instant imbued with a significance he had never foreseen. He had forged his path through assertiveness, through seizing opportunities, through ensuring that events unfolded precisely as he envisioned. However, this was not a transaction. This was his daughter, and no plan could ever compensate for the time that had slipped away. He and Clara had established a cautious rhythm. Each morning, he gathered with them for breakfast at the hotel's restaurant, seated opposite Lily as she delicately nibbled her toast in meticulous little bites. She remained timid in his presence, uncertain of his role in her life, yet she had started to open up to him. Initially, it was the little gestures, looking up at him as he talked, affirming with a nod to his inquiries. She began sharing small snippets of her day, mentioning the amusing bird she spotted outside their hotel window and her dislike for the orange juice, which she found too sour. He clung to each word. One afternoon, as he and Clara lounged on a shaded terrace, with Lily engrossed in her small set of toys at their feet, he finally mustered the courage to pose the question that had been eating away at him since the moment he uncovered the truth. "What brings you here, Clara?" She averted her gaze from him initially. Her eyes remained fixed on Lily, observing as their daughter meticulously arranged small plastic cups into a tower. After a moment, she expressed that we required a pause. Life at home has been challenging. Edward observed her closely, recognizing the tightness in her shoulders. He had been familiar with Clara to the extent that he could sense when she was concealing something difficult. How he insisted. Clara let out a soft sigh, her gaze shifting to him at last. Lily has been inquiring about her father. Something within him contorted at that. "What did you say to her?" Clara paused, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Initially, I explained to her that families exist in various forms, with some children having both a mother and father together, while others may not. However, she possesses great intelligence, Edward." She kept on inquiring. She was curious to find out if you existed, if you had any awareness of her presence. Edward let out a breath, his gaze fixed on Lily, who remained absorbed in her tower. The realization that she had devoted her brief existence to pondering him, seeking answers that remained elusive, struck him with an unexpected heaviness in his heart. "So you brought her here," he murmured softly. Clara gave a slight nod. "I wasn't sure if our paths would cross, yet a part of me secretly wished they would." Edward glanced at her again, his expression a mystery that left her pondering. "Would you have ever shared that with me?" Clara swallowed hard, her fingers gripping the armrest of her chair with increasing intensity. "I'm not sure," she confessed. "I had the desire to. I came close on numerous occasions, yet fear held me back." Edward felt a conflict within himself. He hesitated to hear her reasons, yet he understood the necessity of doing so. "What is there to be afraid of?" She gazed at her hands. "That you would despise me, that you would despise her, or that you would attempt to steal her away." Edward experienced a sudden rush of remorse. He had devoted a significant portion of his life to the notion that control was synonymous with security, that wielding power meant avoiding vulnerability at all costs. Had he truly transformed into the sort of man that Clara had dreaded would wield his power against her? "I would never have done that," he said, his voice unwavering. Clara gazed up at him, her deep eyes probing his. "I wish to hold onto that belief." For an extended silence, neither of them uttered a word. Years of silence stretched endlessly between them. So many thoughts remain unexpressed. Then Lily's tower fell apart with a soft thud, and she released a tiny, disheartened sigh. Edward bent low, meticulously gathering the plastic cups and arranging them once more. "Would you like to give it another shot?" he inquired. Lily glanced at him briefly before offering a subtle nod. With a gentle touch, she extended her small fingers, lightly grazing his as she accepted the cup from his grasp. It was an ordinary moment, yet for Edward, it held profound significance. Clara observed them, a gentle warmth beginning to emerge in her demeanor. Perhaps her fears from that time were justified. Perhaps he was not quite prepared. Yet he stood prepared at this moment, determined not to squander another instant. Edward had always struggled with patience. His whole existence revolved around swift decisions, bold actions that allowed no space for doubt. He was a person who established objectives and realized them, who always ensured that time was acknowledged and valued. Yet, he was coming to understand that only through patience could he attain what was genuinely significant. Lily was gradually starting to place her trust in him, but it was unfolding in cautious, measured increments. She continued to seek Clara's reassurance whenever he spoke, still pausing before responding to his inquiries. Yet she was gradually allowing him to enter her world. She allowed him to take a seat next to her at breakfast, maintaining a distance from her mother. She allowed him to assist her in selecting colors while she was creating in her sketchbook. She allowed him to hold the door open for her, exuding a quiet confidence as she stepped through without hesitation. Though they were minor, Edward cherished them as triumphs. One afternoon, he stood outside the hotel's garden courtyard, observing as Lily knelt beside a row of flowers. She glided her fingers across the petals, whispering softly to herself in a way that eluded his ears. Clara sat on a nearby bench, maintaining a respectful distance while observing Lily with the gentle vigilance of a parent attuned to her child's every action. Edward approached with deliberate slowness, ensuring he didn't surprise Lily. "What are you up to?" he inquired, maintaining a cheerful tone. Lily lifted her gaze to him briefly before returning her attention to the flowers. She spoke to the bees with an air of certainty. Edward lifted an eyebrow in curiosity. What are they discussing?" Lily pressed her lips together, deep in contemplation. They have a lot on their plates, which keeps their conversations brief. However, I believe they have an appreciation for the flowers. Edward knelt beside her, watching the delicate bees darting among the flowers. He had never paused to observe details like this before. His universe had perpetually been overwhelming, incessantly pressing. Yet, in this moment with his daughter, the idea of slowing down felt surprisingly appealing. "Are you fond of flowers?" he inquired. Lily gave a slight nod. "Mother claims they bring joy to others." Edward cast a sidelong look at Clara, who observed them while feigning disinterest. He glanced over his shoulder at Lily. "She is correct. Indeed they do." Lily pondered this for a moment, then gestured toward a delicate, pale purple flower. "That one is my absolute favorite." Edward beamed. "I recall you mentioning your fondness for purple." Lily gazed at him, her expression one of astonishment, as though she had not anticipated him recalling such a minor detail. She remained silent, yet a subtle change flickered across her face, a gentler nuance emerging. Edward allowed the moment to linger between them, neither pushing nor hurrying. Eventually, Lily rose to her feet, brushing off her dress with a delicate motion. "I'm feeling quite hungry," she declared. Clara interpreted this as her signal to rise as well. She nodded in agreement, suggesting we head indoors. The hour for lunch approaches swiftly. Edward paused briefly before he began to speak. "How about we share a meal together?" Clara cast a quiet glance at Lily, seeking her thoughts. Lily inclined her head, contemplating, then gave a nod of agreement. "Understood." It was a lukewarm affirmation, neither a resounding yes nor a definitive no. Edward viewed it as a step forward. As they stepped inside side by side, a sense of calm washed over Edward for the first time since uncovering the truth. Perhaps he had transformed from a mere stranger into something more significant. Perhaps, just perhaps, he was beginning to evolve into something greater. Edward was starting to understand that trust couldn't be something he simply commanded. It was a journey he needed to undertake, bit by bit, experience by experience. With Lily, each little triumph held significance. In the days that followed, their exchanges flowed with greater ease. She continued to have her moments of silence, pausing occasionally before addressing him, yet the doubt in her gaze was diminishing. She released her grip on Clara when he was nearby. She closed the gap between them, no longer hesitating in the face of his presence. One morning, he walked into the breakfast room to see Lily already at their familiar table, a plate of pancakes waiting for her. Clara poured herself a cup of coffee, her demeanor reflecting a newfound sense of ease that had eluded her for days. Edward drew out his chair and settled in, observing as Lily meticulously drizzled syrup over her pancakes. "Are they worthwhile?" he inquired. Lily looked up at him, her mind working as she chewed, then gave a slow nod. "They seem fine." Edward wore a sly grin. "Merely satisfactory?" After a brief pause, she remarked they would be improved with strawberries. Edward acknowledged with a solemn nod. "I'll keep that in mind for the future." Lily observed him closely, as though weighing the sincerity of his words. In silence, she nudged her plate a bit closer to him. "If you wish, you may take some." Edward sensed a constriction in his chest. It was a seemingly modest act, yet from her, it carried a significance that she may not have fully understood. He grasped his fork, slicing off a delicate morsel before savoring the taste. He remarked that it wasn't bad, yet he acknowledged your point. Strawberries would enhance their quality. Lily offered a faint, contented smile before turning her attention back to her breakfast. Clara, observing the interaction in silence, cast Edward a knowing glance. It was the first occasion when Lily had chosen to share something with him, and they both recognized it. Following their morning meal, they chose to stroll along the shoreline. The secluded shoreline of the resort was tranquil, with the waves softly caressing the sand. Lily meandered between them, her tiny hand sometimes stretching out to grasp Clara's as they ambled along. Edward observed her as she knelt to retrieve a seashell, examining it closely in her hands before lifting it for a better view. "Text, this one is quite lovely," she remarked. Edward grasped it from her, scrutinizing it intently. "Indeed it is. Are you fond of gathering shells?" Lily gave a subtle nod. "Mom says they're like tiny echoes from the sea." Edward returned the shell to her. The shell returned to her. In that case, it would be wise to hold on to it. Lily paused briefly, then deftly tucked it into the pocket of her dress. In a surprising twist, she unexpectedly reached out and grasped his hand. It was a brief, delicate connection, her tiny fingers encircling his for an instant before she released him and darted forward, the water splashing playfully at her feet. Edward remained motionless, a profound change stirring within him. Clara, next to him, offered a gentle smile. She whispered that she's becoming accustomed to you. Edward exhaled gently, his gaze fixed on Lily as she twirled gracefully along the shoreline. He confessed that he believed he was starting to understand her as well. For the first time in his life, the allure of business, power, and success faded, revealing that they weren't the most significant pursuits after all. Indeed, she did. Edward had devoted his whole existence to the notion that achievement was quantified by figures. Income, mergers, market portions. Those were the foundations upon which he had constructed his universe. As he stood on the beach, observing Lily gather seashells with an expression of sheer joy, he came to the realization that perhaps he had been mistaken all this time. The remainder of the afternoon unfolded in a manner that seemed almost dreamlike. As they strolled along the shoreline, Lily would dash ahead intermittently, eager to chase the waves, only to return moments later, beaming with excitement as she presented yet another hidden gem she had unearthed from the sand. With every glance, her eyes reflected a growing trust, as though she was gradually starting to accept that he would remain by her side. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they had gathered a modest assortment of shells, which Lily meticulously organized on a wooden deck beside the beach chairs. She settled into a cross-legged position, carefully examining each item before categorizing them into distinct groups. Edward observed, captivated by her unwavering concentration on something so seemingly trivial. Clara settled next to him, a gentle breeze tousling her dark hair as she shifted her gaze between them. She had never experienced this before. she murmured gently. Edward glanced at her, a crease forming on his forehead. What did you have? Clara paused, weighing her words with deliberation. A paternal presence. Person who is engaged and attentive. Someone who gazes at her with the same admiration you do. Edward felt a lump in his throat, uncertain of how to react to the situation. For years, he had persuaded himself that family was an unnecessary burden, that love and connections were mere distractions that would hinder his progress. Yet, as he gazed at Lily in that moment, a deep longing stirred within him for all the precious times that had slipped away unnoticed. He finally admitted, "The past is unchangeable, yet I am present in this moment. If you would permit me." Clara gazed at him, her expression a mystery waiting to be unraveled. "What unfolds when we depart from this location?" Edward let out a breath, his fingers combing through his hair. He had also been contemplating that. Their stay at the resort had seemed like a secluded haven, a fleeting reprieve from the everyday world. Yet, he hoped this wouldn't conclude when they vacated their hotel rooms. He expressed a desire for permanence. "I desire to be a part of her life, not merely for a short period, not merely as a remote presence she hardly recognizes. I desire to take on the role of her father, truly support her." Clara observed him intently for a prolonged moment before she finally spoke. "That signifies being present, Edward. Not solely when it suits you. Not solely when it aligns with your timetable. She isn't a transaction to be bargained over. She is a young child who craves consistency, who yearns for the assurance that those around her will remain steadfast." Edward nodded, his jaw clenched in determination. "I'm aware of that. I am determined to show you that I am capable of fulfilling her needs." Clara examined his expression, and in that moment, he witnessed the final remnants of her doubt disappear. "Then show me," she whispered. Just as he was about to reply, Lily dashed over, clutching something firmly in her hands. "Look," she said, her small fingers unfurling to showcase a tiny, flawlessly formed white shell. "This one holds a unique significance." Edward leaned in, carefully accepting the shell from her grasp. "It's truly stunning," he remarked. "What makes it unique?" Lily inclined her head, lost in thought. "This is the final one I discovered today. It resembles a fortunate shell." Edward smiled, a warmth spreading through him as he absorbed the purity in her words. "Then I believe we ought to hold on to it," he remarked as a reminder. Lily nodded with enthusiasm. Without a moment's pause, she settled onto his lap, her head gently resting against his chest. Edward sensed a sudden tightness in his chest. It marked the first occasion she approached him independently, unprompted and without Clara's comforting presence. The gesture was quiet, yet it carried profound significance. Clara observed them, and when Edward turned his gaze toward her, he noticed a change in her demeanor, something resembling acceptance. For the first time in his life, Edward Sterling sensed that he had truly discovered something valuable to cherish. This time he was determined not to let it slip away. The elegance of this conclusion resides in its subtle yet profoundly moving resolution. It's not about extravagant displays or theatrical proclamations. It's about something much deeper: commitment, trust, and the gradual mending of connections. Edward Sterling starts this narrative as an individual who measures success through dominance and authority, convinced that emotional connections merely act as hindrances. Ultimately, he discovers that genuine success lies not in the achievements of the boardroom, but in the relationships he cultivates in his personal life. Lily's slow embrace of Edward is what imbues this journey with such strength. Her hesitation to fully accept him as her father adds a layer of authenticity to her trust. It unfolds in fleeting instances, where he finds himself beside her at breakfast, savoring her pancakes, instinctively grasping his hand with a sense of ease. The most poignant moment occurs when she chooses to settle onto his lap, leaning against him as if she has finally found someone she can trust. That solitary action holds greater significance than any words might convey. Clara's contribution holds significant value. She transcends the role of a mere love interest. She embodies a mother, fiercely devoted to safeguarding her child's well-being. Her pause isn't rooted in malice, but rather in a long history of doubt. She must recognize that Edward is genuinely committed to remaining by her side, that he won't abandon her when challenges arise. When she finally challenges him to prove it, she is offering him the chance to become the father Lily truly deserves, rather than deciding that for him. The sense of fulfillment in this ending arises from its deliberate avoidance of a hasty, flawless resolution. Edward doesn't resolve all issues in an instant, and the narrative doesn't wrap up with an improbable fairy tale ending. Ultimately, it concludes with the hope of authenticity. A father finally taking responsibility, a mother starting to rebuild her trust, and a little girl discovering that love can exist without strings attached. This narrative explores the theme of second chances, the quest to reclaim lost moments, and the profound understanding that family transcends mere biological ties. It's about presence, about commitment, about the decision to embrace love even in challenging times. Ultimately, Edward discovers more than just a daughter. He discovers something infinitely more precious. He discovers a meaning that no level of riches or achievement could ever substitute.